Appendix by Charles Lamb. Page 425. Scraps of Criticism. London Magazine, December 1822. Not signed. In December 1822, the editor of the London Magazine inaugurated a new department to be called the Miscellany, a place of refuge for small ingenious productions. To ask Lamb's assistance would be the most natural thing in the world, and though no signature is attached, there is, I think, enough internal evidence for us to consider his the contribution to the first installment, which has the subtitle, Scraps of Criticism. Page 425, second quotation. This passage describing Milton is in Gray's Progress of Poesy, Roman 3, 2, and not, as Lamb inadvertently says, in the Bard. Page 425, foot. Salmasius. Salmasius, Claude de Salmais, 1588–1653, a professor at Leyden who wrote a defense of Charles I in Latin, 1649, to which Milton replied, 1650, also in Latin. It was while engaged in this work that Milton lost his sight. Page 426, second paragraph. Howell's Letters. Epistle Hoelian, familiar letters, domestic and foreign, divided into sundry sections, partly historical, political and philosophical, 1645–1655. By James Howell, 1594–1666. It was James Russell Lowell's theory, shared by other critics, that Lamb borrowed the name Elia from Hoelian. But this was not the case. The letter referred to in line 22 is to Captain Thomas Porter, July 10, 1623, and the fourth letter from which Lamb quotes is to Sir James Crofts, August 21, 1623. I have restored Howell's capitals. The italics are Lamb's. Page 427 at the end. The salutation. Lamb was probably wrong in this theory. According to Larwood and Houghton's History of Signboards, 1867, the sign originally represented an angel saluting the Virgin Mary. In the time of the Commonwealth, this was changed to a soldier saluting a civilian. And later it became PG 552, the salutation of two citizens. The form of the old sign of the salutation in Newgate Street, where Coleridge lived a while, and where Lamb and he talked into the night over egg hot. Ben Jonson's salutation, referred to in Bartholomew Fair, was in Billingsgate. Salutation and cat was a blend of two signs. Page 427. The Choice of a Grave. London Magazine, January 1823, not signed. There's a passage in the Elia essay on distant correspondence concerning Lord Camelford's fantastic instructions concerning the burial of his body, which bears upon this same subject. Page 428. Wilkes, London Magazine, January 1823, not signed. John Wilkes, 1727–1797 of the North Briton. Barry Cornwall writes in his Memoir of Lamb, I remember that, at one of the monthly magazine dinners when John Wilkes was too roughly handled, Lamb quoted the story, not generally known, of his replying, when the blackbirds were reported to have stolen all his cherries. Poor birds, they are welcome. He said that those impulsive words showed the inner nature of the man more truly than all his political speeches. Page 428. Milton, London Magazine, February 1823, not signed. Page 428, foot. Mr. Todd. Henry John Todd, 1763–1845, whose edition of Milton in 6 volumes for Long the Standard was first published in 1801. The lines in question are crossed out in the original manuscript of Camus, now preserved at Trinity College, Cambridge, and are not printed in ordinary editions of Milton. Todd was the first to print them, in his edition of Camus, 1798. Page 429. A Check to Human Pride. London Magazine, February 1823, not signed. Page 429. Review of Dibdin's Comic Tales. The New Times, January 27, 1825. I have no doubt that Lamb wrote this review, both from internal evidence and from what we know, through the medium of his letters, of his feelings towards the book and its author. And it has been retained in the appendix instead of taking its place in the text proper through an oversight. In a letter to John Bates Dibdin, the author's son, dated January 11, 1825, Lamb writes, Pray return my best thanks to your father for his little volume. It is like all of his I have seen, spirited, good-humored, and redolent of the wit and humor of a century ago. He should have lived with Gay and his set. The Chessiad is so clever that I relished it in spite of my total ignorance of the game. I have it PG 553 not before me, But I remember a capital simile of the charwoman letting in her watchman husband, which is better than Butler's lobster turned to red. Hazard is a grand character Jove in his chair. Butler's simile in Hudibras runs. Charles Dibdin the Younger, 1768–1853, was the author of a number of plays and songs, and also of a history of the London theatres, 1826. The full title of the comic tales was Comic Tales and Lyrical Fancies, including the Chessiad, a Macaroic in 5 cantos, and the Wreath of Love in 4 cantos, 1825. The adaptation from Milton in the first sentence is very alien. See Paradise Lost, Roman 7, 21-23. Page 430, line 13. Hoyle, Philidor, meaning more at home in whist than in chess. From Edmund Hoyle, 1670–1769, author of a short treatise on the game of whist, 1742, and François-André Philidor, 1726–1795, the composer and an authority upon chess. Lamb was, of course, a great whist player. Page 430, line 16. Swift and Gay. Swift wrote a short but admirably observant city poem, a description of the morning. Gay's Trivia, or The Art of Walking the Streets of London, would be the work in Lamb's mind. Page 430, Dog Days. Everyday Book, July 14, 1825. This humane letter is considered by Mr. J. A. Rutter, a profound student of Lamb, to be probably Lamb's work, a protest against Hone's remark in the Everyday Book that dogs would have to be exterminated. There certainly is no difficulty in conceiving it to be from Lamb's pen, although there is no overwhelming internal evidence. Writing to Hone on July 25, 1825, Lamb offers further hints as to the dog days for the Everyday Book. Lamb's interest in dogs became more personal after Hood gave him Dash for a companion. In the letter to P.G. Patmore, dated from Enfield, September, 1827, he speaks of mad dogs. All the dogs here are going mad, if you believe the overseers, but I protest they seem to me very rational and collected. But nothing is so deceitful as mad people, to those who are not used to them. Try him Dash with hot water. If he won't lick it up, it is a sign he does not like it. Does his tail wag horizontally, or PG 554 perpendicularly? That has decided the fate of many dogs in Enfield. Is his general deportment cheerful? I mean when he is pleased, for otherwise there is no judging. You can't be too careful. Has he bit any of the children yet? If he has, have them shot, and keep him for curiosity, to see if it was the hydrophobia. They say all our army in India had it at one time, but that was in Hyder Ali's time. Page 431, Hood's Progress of Cant. Page 432, Mr. Ephraim Wagstaff. In the Table Book, 1827, beginning on column 185, vol. Roman 2, is this humorous story which there is some reason to believe is by Lamb. The late Mr. Dykes Campbell had no doubt whatever, the proof reciting not only in internal evidence, but in the rhymed story of Dick Stripe, which we may safely assume Lamb to have written. The subject of the two stories, prose and verse, is the same, and the style of Ephraim Wagstaff is not unlike that of Duke Judkins. Dick Stripe is printed in vol. Roman 4. Of this edition. Page 435, Review of Moxon's Sonnets. The Assinum, April 13, 1833, not signed. Edward Moxon, 1801–1858, the publisher and Lamb's protégé and adopted son-in-law, was himself a poet in a modest way. His first book, The Prospect, 1826, he dedicated to Samuel Rogers, another patron. Christmas followed in 1829, dedicated to Lamb, and in 1830 his first collection of sonnets was issued. In the second series, 1835, are some touching lines on Lamb. I have no proof that the Athenæum Review is by Lamb, but I believe it to be so. Attention was first drawn to it by Mr. J. A. Rutter in Notes and Queries, December 22, 1900, who remarked upon the phrase integrity above his avocation, as being perhaps the only instance that exists of unconscious humor on the part of Charles Lamb. Page 435, line 12. Humphrey Moseley. Humphrey Moseley, d. 1661, the bookseller of St. Paul's Churchyard and publisher of the first collected edition of Milton, 1645, and also of Waller, Crashaw, Donne, Vaughan. He prefixed to the Milton the words, "It is the love I have to our own language that hath made me diligent to collect and set forth such pieces, both in prose and verse." Pg 555, as may renew the wonted honor and esteem of our English tongue. Page 435, line 20. What we hope E.M. will be in his. Moxon nobly fulfilled the wish. He published Tennyson's first book in 1833 and all that followed during his lifetime. He became Wordsworth's publisher in 1835. He published Browning's Sordello and Bells and Pomegranates, and he commissioned fine editions of the old dramatists. PG 556, PG 557.